Hey friends, it's Robin. Welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be recapping my spring TBR and going over all of the books that I read. If you did not catch my original spring TBR, I will link it up in the cards as well as in the description box. But every season I put 10 books onto a TBR and I like to reflect back on that TBR at the end of the season and see how I did. And now that summer is starting very soon, I wanted to wrap up my spring TBRs. So let's get into how I did. So of the 10 books that I put on the spring TBR, I read all 10 of them. I am a TBR reader, and so that is not super surprising for me. I tend to read my TBRs, but all of the 10 books, I did read them, and surprisingly, most of them were really, really good. I gave out a couple of 3 stars, but there were a lot of 5 stars on this list. I've been having a really good reading year, so a lot of my books have been 5 stars. But let's get into everything that I read and how I rated them. So first up was The Long Game by Rachel Reed, and to no one's surprise, this was 5 stars. I loved The Heated Rivalry, and Shane and Isla are probably one of my favorite couples of all time. I'm obsessed with this series, with these two characters. This is an hockey romance, and this is a direct sequel to The Heated Rivalry. So in this, we are following the same characters, and in The Heated Rivalry, they had their happily for now, but in this one, we are following them as they are now in Canada together, doing their careers, and they are kind of struggling on whether or not they should stay private about their relationship or go public. And it is everything surrounding that, all of the pitfalls that they might fall into, all of the controversy that it might cause. And this also deals heavily with mental health. And I adore these characters. I adore this world. I am so happy that Rachel Reed is finally getting print copies of the series because I desperately want print copies of them. I love this series. I will say I've only read Shane and Isla's 2 books. I haven't read the rest of them, but it is on my to-do list to go back and read the rest of the books in this world. Next was I Kissed Char Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. I've talked about this book, I feel like, a lot, but I gave this one 4.5 stars. YA contemporary is not my genre by any means, but if Casey McQuiston writes it, I want to read it. And I obviously had to buy this beautiful Waterstones edition. There were tons of exclusive editions of this, but I needed the pink sprayed edges. And this is, like I said, a YA contemporary. We are following 4 main characters, and 3 of them are connected to Shara Wheeler, and Shara suddenly disappears, and the 3 other main characters start getting these little notes from her, and they have to work together to figure out what happened to Shara. This has a lot of queer rep in it. This has a lot of discussions about small towns and religion and loving who you are and accepting yourself, especially surrounded by people that don't necessarily want you to accept yourself. And this was exceptionally well written. This has amazing friendships and relationships, and I really, really loved this. I listened to this one on audio, and the audiobook was fantastic. Again, I gave it 4.5 stars, not 5 stars, just because there was a portion in here where I wasn't sure about it, and the ending ended up redeeming itself for me. But the beginning was a 5 star, like the first half was a 5 star, and then the last like 80 pages was a 5 star, but that middle part kind of fell for me a little bit, but overall, I absolutely loved this. Highly recommend. After that, I read The Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert. This is the first book in her new monster romance series, and this is actually in the same world as her Bloodline Vampires series. We get a little glimpse of this right at the end of, I think it's Queen, and in this we are following our heroine, Briar Rose, who is trying to get out of an abusive marriage, and she ends up making a deal with a demon, and she is taken to this fantasy realm, and she is married off to a dragon, and it is their romance. And this was really good. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. This is a really, really short romance. It is very Katie Robert. But I will say that this at least had more romantic buildup than some of her other fantasy books. Like the Bloodline Vampire series is insta-love, like straight up insta-love. This did have a little bit more romantic development before we got to the steam, and I did appreciate that. My one caveat, like with my one holdup, I guess, with this book is Katie Roberts' world building leaves a little to be desired. I did not understand this world at all. I didn't understand why these heroines needed to be here. I didn't understand why they were helping fix magic. And it wouldn't have been a big deal, but it's brought up a couple of times, and I didn't follow. I didn't get it. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it was the actual world building in here, but that part didn't jive with me. But overall, the romance was good. It's very Katie Robert, steamy, good monsters. And yeah, like 3.5 stars. Next is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. And I put this on this list after absolutely loving Addie LaRue. And I gave this one 5 stars. I was very hesitant. I was seeing some pretty mixed things about it. This is a really, really short YA, and I wasn't sure about it. And I actually had kind of come to the conclusion that I was not going to read this in time for this wrap up, but I ended up reading this for the 48-hour Bookathon. I will link that vlog up in the cards as well as in the description box. And I am so glad I ended up reading this because this was fantastic. I talk about this a lot in both that vlog as well as my last recent reads, so I'm not gonna sit here too much with this one, but this book has the best atmosphere. The writing is beautiful. It has the creepy vibes that I love from this type of book, and even though it's very slow and low on the plot, I loved this. I loved this a lot. The next book was another 5 stars, and that was A Cruel and Fated Light by Ashley Shuttleworth. This is the sequel to A Dark and Hollow Star, and despite the atrocious cover that is here, I absolutely loved this sequel. I was really nervous going into my reread and read of this because I had absolutely loved the first book when I read it last year, and after I read it, there were a lot of reviews coming out about how disappointed everybody was, and I was really nervous going into my reread that I was going to feel that, and I ended up giving that one 5 stars again, and the sequel was another 5-star read. This has a massive cast of characters. This has so much politics and political maneuverings. There are so many paranormal fantasy creatures and beings in here. Everything is very smashed together and it's a lot. And I get why people don't like it, but I'm kind of obsessed. I think it is so unique and so fun, and I like the writing, and the characters are precious little beings that need to be protected, and I love this series a lot. I love all of the queer characters. I love the relationships that are developing. We started getting some of the romances in here, and it was everything I wanted. And yeah, I love the series. I want more right now. I don't want to have to wait for book 3. And then another 5-star book was Headcase by Emily James. I have since read the next book as well, and this entire series has been 5 stars for me. This, I will say, I think this is my least favorite of the series. This is Asa's story, and Asa is one of the twins, and this is his romance with Zane, who is a reporter, and this has my favorite plot of the entire series. This has a mystery plot in it, and my least favorite romance. It's not a bad romance by any means. Like, when I say it's my least favorite of all 5 stars. So take that with a grain of salt. But Asa is very dominating, and there is blood play and some overpowering stuff in here. And it's not really my jam, but it's still a great romance. It's a possessive psychopath romance, and I cannot get enough of this family, cannot get enough of this world. I am a part of Emily James's Patreon. She does these little mini-fic things about not only the characters that we've gotten, but the ones that are yet to come, and it's amazing, and I want her to write in this world forever. Next was kind of a dual one. It was a Touch of Malice and a game of Retribution. I wasn't sure which one of these I was going to read because this one I had on hold from the library and this one wasn't out yet, and I read both of them. I wanted to read this one first because I was trying to read these in timeline order, and technically this one comes before A Touch of Malice, but I did read A Touch of Malice first and then A Game of Retribution, and I gave A Game of Retribution 3-ish stars. This takes place at the same time as A Touch of Ruin, and in general, this is my least favorite plot. I talked about this in my recent reads, but this one feels very much like setup for the rest of the books. And so you're getting little glimpses of the political maneuverings and the games and stuff that are being played, but this is a lot of setup. And then A Touch of Malice, I gave 4 stars. This one had a lot of the setup that came from here came into fruition in this one, and I really liked this one a lot. This one is from Persephone's point of view, and this one is from Hades' point of view, and yeah, I love these a lot. They're so much fun. They are not the best written books, they are not the most unique stories in the world, but they are a damn good time. From there was Below Zero by Allie Hazelwood. This was the 3rd and final book in her STEMinist novella series, and I gave this one 5 stars. I am obsessed with the series. This was my favorite of the entire series, and I had a feeling it was going to be just based on like the blurb and the tropes. This is an enemies to lovers second chance romance, and love that combination. We are following our heroine who is an aerospace engineer, and she is trying to work her way to NASA, and she ends up having this meeting with a guy that is a couple years older than her but close to her age, and he works for NASA, and she does an interview with them and they have this really immediate connection, but they end up going their separate ways. And then years later, when she starts working at NASA, they reunite and things happen and there are some misunderstandings, and the two of them end up becoming enemies. But our heroine ends up going on this really dangerous mission, and she ends up getting stuck in the Arctic, and nobody is willing to save her except for the hero, and it is their romance, and it was so good. It was so good. I am just obsessed with this audio series. It is so well written, and these stories feel so developed. Like, these are only like 3-hour audiobooks. They're very short. They're like 100 and some pages long, and somehow it feels like a whole developed romance, and I don't know how Ellie Hazelwood does that, but I'm obsessed with this whole series. And then my final 5-star was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This was my most anticipated book of the entire year, and I know a lot of people are disappointed by this one, but I loved it. I loved this a lot. I don't think that Emily Henry can write a book that I will dislike. There is just something about her writing that is so captivating and heartwarming. It is funny and witty and quirky, and it hits me. I don't know if it's because Emily Henry and I are very similar in age, so all of the things in here are very millennial, like my age millennial, and I connect to it every single time. I loved these main characters. Our heroine, she is always the girl that people end up breaking up with to find their small town romance, and she essentially has the equivalent of a Hallmark romance if she were the evil girlfriend back home who ends up getting her true love with the evil guy back home as well. And neither one of them is actually evil, but like they both love the city and they both love their jobs that take up all of their time, and they love their penthouse apartments, and she loves wearing heels and expensive clothes, and she has no desire to give that up, and I can get on board with that. As a city girl, I have no desire to go open up a coffee shop in a small farming town and fall in love with a cowboy. Like, that's not my jam. And so I think that's why I loved this so much, is she was like, no, this is who I am. I don't want to go to a small town and fall in love with the small town hero. And I thought it was really good. It was a really unique take on a romance. I love when romances can take those really, really popular tropes and just kind of turn them on their heads. And that's what this did. I loved it. Like I said, I know this wasn't everyone's favorite romance, but it's still classic Emily Henry. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. This still has amazing writing and characters and everything that you love in an Emily Henry story. And then the final book was All Fired Up by Dylan Newton. This was the companion book to How Sweet It Is, and I give this one 3.5 stars. This wasn't my favorite. I ended up liking How Sweet It Is more than this one, but this was still really fun and cute. This does take place in a small town. We are following our heroine, who is a publicist, and she is overworked and she needs a break, and she ends up going back to her grandmother's small town to help her grandmother because her grandmother is getting surgery, and at the same time she is helping with her best friend's wedding, and her best friend's husband is her client, and those were the main characters from How Sweet It Is, and she ends up reuniting with a one-night stand who is her client's brother, and the two of them have this really strong attraction, but she does not feel like she has room in her life for a relationship, and she doesn't feel like he is responsible enough for a relationship. And it is them spending the spring together, growing closer, and essentially their personal growth journeys while coming together. There was a part at the end that just didn't work for me in this. I didn't feel like they changed their ways for the right reasons. So our heroine makes some pretty terrible comments to our hero, and he ends up revamping his life over it. And as much as I think that growth needed to happen, I didn't feel like, one, it came from the right place, and two, she put a lot of stuff onto him saying like, this is all your fault. And I just didn't like that all of the blame was placed on the hero when it was really both of them that had faults and needed to work through things. And especially like with her mental health, like there was responsibility that needed to be taken, like responsibility for actions that she took. And I just didn't feel like that happened. And so it wasn't my all-time favorite, but it did have a cute ending, and the romance itself, the writing was really cute and sweet and fun. So in the end, 3.5 stars, good, but not my all-time favorite. So that is it for my spring wrap-up. That is all 10, technically 11 books that I read from that TBR. I obviously read way more books this spring than just this, but I will have a quarter 2 wrap-up coming in, I think, July, so next month. That will be wrapping up all the books that I read in April, May, and June, so the majority of spring. I will be posting my summer TBR very soon, so keep an eye out for that, and I'll catch y'all in my next video. Bye!